Hello, back to the weekly discussion of what's happening here in the Dáil, what's happening in politics, and an opportunity for people to ask questions and hopefully get answers. Please feel free to share it, like, comment, all that good stuff, so that more people are aware of it and can participate in it. There's a whole bunch of things happening this week in the Dáil. Maybe the most important thing for us this week is we have our private members' time, which is an opportunity for us to put forward proposed law, which we get once every 2 months or so. We have that tomorrow morning, and then there'll be a vote tomorrow night. So we're using it to put forward a bill called the Equal Pay for Young Workers Bill, which is about getting rid of the horrendous discrimination and exploitation of young workers. I think a lot of people don't know it, but that the minimum wage doesn't apply to workers who are under the age of 20. So 11.30 is the minimum wage, completely inadequate, nowhere near a living wage. Really, you would need €15 an hour to be able to survive in a basic level. But if you're 19 or under, you're not legally entitled as a minimum to that wage. Instead, if you're 19, they can pay you 90% of that. If you're 18, they can pay you 80% of that. If you're 17 or under, they can pay you 70% of an already massively inadequate minimum wage. In other words, they can pay you less than €8 an hour. It's an absolute scandal. There's about 15,000 young workers currently working in that situation in the economy. About a quarter of all young workers, those under the age of 20 who are currently working, are paid less than the minimum wage. So it's scandalous exploitation of those young workers. It also has a negative impact on all workers because, for example, in the summertime, employers, retail sector, pub trade, restaurants will be looking to employ, have more workers for more hours, but instead of giving extra hours to their existing employees at the minimum wage or higher, instead certainly some of them will try and take young workers on less than the minimum wage. Therefore, it acts to depress hours and wages for all workers. So it's a scandal. It's very obviously a scandal. The Council of Europe, even I raised with the Taoiseach earlier, even said that it was a scandal, that it's a breach of a charter in terms of labour rights. As a result, the broad trade union movement is against this, supports the bill. The Irish Congress of Trade Unions, Unite, Mandate. It's also supported by all the third level students' unions, and it's supported by the School Students' Union. So I asked the Taoiseach earlier, will they be supporting this bill? I didn't get an answer. Is the truth? Could I just smile and be happy? Ireland's amazing. Well, unfortunately, there's lots of great things about Ireland. Nice day to be outside. But if you're a young worker and you've been paid less than €8 an hour and the government says that's okay, it's okay to be discriminated against, I don't think that's okay. You can't go to your landlord and say, sorry, I'm only going to pay 80% of my rent because I'm only 18. You can't go to a supermarket and say I'm going to pay 90% of the cost of these things because I'm 19. You're faced with the full costs. So I think it's scandalous, and it's okay for people not to be okay with that. So no, we think it's scandalous. We're trying to put pressure on the government to allow the bill to pass the bill in the Dáil tomorrow, and to get rid of this discrimination and exploitation, super exploitation of young people. So please, even at this stage, if you can, contact your TD. We have a rally in front of the Dáil at 9:30 in the morning. Most 18-year-olds, just to respond to some of the comments, live at home. There's no accommodation available. That's definitely true. There's over 500,000 young people, never mind 18-year-olds, 30-year-olds are still living at home. But there's plenty of people. Like, there's this idea to kind of justify the idea of paying poverty wages to young people, that sure, this is just pocket money. There's plenty of young people for whom this is definitely not pocket money. This is money. They might be college students, working to pay for their way through college and they rely upon this money, or they're people in full-time work. There's plenty of people in full-time work, 18, 19 years of age, and who can legally be paid even less than the minimum wage. And just imagine trying to, survive on €10 an hour, just over €9 an hour. It's an utter scandal. Hi Paul, do you ever genuinely see yourself in government, or okay to shout from the sidelines? I certainly want to be in a government. I don't want to be in a government to make up the numbers. I don't want to be in a government to pretend that I'm having influence. You look at the Green Party. We're at the Green Party's in government because climate crisis is so severe. We need to be in government. When they're in government and the climate crisis is obviously getting absolutely worse. Irish emissions are rising, some of the highest in the European Union. You look at the data centres, etc., which we'll talk about in a minute. So they're just fooling themselves that they're having any influence. So I want to be in a government that will transform society in the interest of ordinary people, that will build hundreds of thousands of public homes to address the housing crisis, that will have rent controls that bring rents down to affordable levels, that will invest in building a national health service, that will take on the big polluters, take them out of private ownership into public democratic ownership, and plan our economy in the interest of ordinary people. So I want to be in a left government that pursues eco-socialist policies, and that's the kind of government that is the only government that's going to bring about the kind of change that we need. A government that will actually stand up to the big polluters, the bankers, and the big corporations, corporate landlords, developers, and so on. Right, I'll have a look at another couple of questions, and then I'll go on with things I was going to talk about. There's some nice comments there, as well as the bad ones. Thanks a lot. How much do you make a year? That's a good question. So a TD makes, a gross salary of a TD is about €107,000. I take, though, an average worker's wage, or less than an average worker's wage, less than €30,000 gross, and the rest of the money we use for campaigning. So it's donated to local community campaigns, football clubs, given as donations to striking workers, and that kind of thing. So we're in favour of all TDs being cut to the average wage of ordinary workers. I just answered a second ago, the question about actually enter the government. So I definitely do want to enter a government, but not at the price of pretending to be in a government, that pretending to have influence, get some ministerial cars, etc. We want to be in a government that transforms things for ordinary people, that actually puts ordinary people in power. You don't care about the Irish who is homeless, who's going to be homeless, all lies. Hi Sinead. I mean, I've been organising protests about the housing crisis for a decade at this stage. I don't know if you've been on any of those protests. Obviously, the vast majority of people who are homeless are Irish people, so they're protests for the Irish homeless as they are for all the homeless. I don't discriminate. I don't think anyone needs to be on the streets. I think it's scandalous that the government leave people on the streets. But I think it suits the big developers, the corporate landlords. It suits them. They're the ones who are gaining from the housing crisis. They're getting super rich off the housing crisis. It really suits them to have people like you saying that, oh, the problem is the asylum seekers, that's why we have a housing crisis. It's definitely not. We had a housing crisis well before the invasion of Ukraine and the increase in the number of asylum seekers. We have a housing crisis because the government does not represent the interests of ordinary people. Regardless of where they're from, they represent the interests of the rich, the big tech companies, for example. You look at the massive expansion of the data centres and those who are benefiting from the housing crisis, those who are benefiting from the health crisis. And we need to build a movement that unites ordinary people to say housing for everybody. On that topic, I mean, there was really shocking figures came out about a week ago about the number of homeless deaths. So 20 people, incredibly, but from January to April, died in homeless services. So when their homeless people died this year. It's absolutely scandalous. One of them was a teenager, an 18-year-old. Horrendous. And people who are old enough will remember it was like 9 years ago, 2014, you had the death of Jonathan Corrie, just not far from here, and he was, rightly seen. It was a homeless man who was rough sleeping. It was rightly seen as a national scandal. There was all this conversation that, no, we can't let this happen again, and it still is. So it's absolutely horrendous, and it's a consequence of the government not investing in the housing crisis and not investing in public services generally. What is needed is a housing first approach, giving people housing and then providing all the supports around them that they need. Why are you allowing our freedom of speech to be destroyed? I presume you're talking about the hate speech legislation, but that doesn't make any sense because I was the only TD to speak out on behalf. I was speaking on behalf of People for Profit against that in the Dáil. If you check the record on that, why are modular homes not given to Irish? I think they should use modular homes as an emergency measure across the board. Absolutely, it should be used to address the housing crisis. So I think public money is well spent. I think the public money spending on nurses and teachers and doctors and in our health service or education service, etc., is generally well spent. But there's certainly plenty of public money that is not well spent at all. The public money spent on politicians, the public money given in corporate welfare, billions of euros a year, the public money that ends up just in the hands of private developers. That's like the government's only scheme to address the housing crisis, to throw money at private developers. So it's a mix. You want eco-socialist policies, but mass immigration is a cause of the ecological crisis. No, it's the reverse. Mass immigration is a consequence of the ecological crisis. It's not a cause. I don't know how mass immigration is going to cause ecological crisis. But certainly if the planet continues to be destroyed and you have more and more extreme weather events, you look at the Horn of Africa now, millions and millions of people facing starvation as a direct consequence of climate change, then it is going to become, there are going to be even larger migrations of people than we've ever seen before. And we need to have, for everybody around the world, we need to avert this ecological catastrophe. And you see what is happening in Ireland is an absolute disaster. But I voted for it. No, I didn't vote for it. That's what I'm saying. Sorry, that's about the hate speech legislation. You'll see, if you check the Dáil record, that I was the one who called the vote against it, which is why I was the teller against it. So maybe just check your facts there before. Probably a fellow who likes to do your own research, but maybe go and do some research on it. But so, on the ecological crisis, the data centres, people will have seen the figures that came out yesterday. A 31% increase year on year in the amount of electricity that's being used by the data centres. So interestingly, household consumption of electricity is going down. Ordinary people are trying to do their bit by getting solar panels, by reducing consumption and so on, even in the context of there being more households. But as a consequence of the data centres expanding the amount of energy that they're using by 31%, our overall electricity consumption is going up. So going in the wrong direction. We're not really getting any closer to 100% renewable energy because we're adding more and more energy usage to it. So now data centres are responsible for 18% of all electricity consumption. So if you add every urban home in Ireland together, all their electricity consumption is equivalent to all of these data centres run by the big tech multinationals. It's absolutely incredible. It's completely out of whack with the norm across anywhere in the world, where about 2% is normal. And this is conscious government policy, is to attract these companies in, basically to dump their toxic digital waste here. That's government policy. There aren't a lot of jobs associated. There's very, very, very few jobs in data centres. They're big, empty, like servers just running, few security guards, but not significant jobs. It's really, really scandalous, and illustrates the fact that the government is serving the interests of the big multinationals rather than the ordinary people who are doing their best, and in terms of trying to avoid climate catastrophe. What's my opinion? There being an election soon. I want an election as soon as possible. I want an opportunity to kick this government out. I want an opportunity for people to elect a left government, a government without Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, a government that hopefully would do some of the things I'm speaking about earlier, i.e. pursue eco-socialist policies, take on the 1% in this society. Do I think Irish homeless have been discriminated by Irish TDs? No, I think homeless people in general are discriminated against by TDs. So that includes all the Irish homeless people. It also includes the 1,400 asylum seekers who scandalously the government put onto the streets, made homeless, including women and children. Like, I think that's an utter disgrace. It's completely unnecessary. We have 50,000 vacant homes in this country for 6 years, vacant for 6 years or more, and then there's all the big public buildings and so on. There is no need. It's a conscious policy decision. There's no need for anyone in this country to be homeless. Any truth are you are to join Sinn Féin? No truth. I'm to join Sinn Féin. Please discuss GSOC. What aspect of GSOC? I mean, basically my attitude is GSOC is pretty toothless in terms of my experience. I've made complaints to GSOC in the past. Friends of mine have made complaints to GSOC in the past about various instances of Garda brutality and so on. Never gone anywhere. Generally, it's ex-guards investigating guards. It's quite unsatisfactory. How did I get into politics? That's a good question. I get into politics. I never intended to get into politics, and I like become a TD or an MEP or whatever. That was never my intention. As a young person, I was inspired by the anti-capitalist movement in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s, anti-globalization movement, pointing out the huge inequalities in the world, the poverty that exists in this country alongside wealth. Became a socialist, read James Connolly and others, identified as a socialist, and then would have been very involved in the anti-war movement. Opinions on guards. What do you mean by that? I'm out, you haven't a clue. That's grand. Would I consider myself a nationalist? No, I consider myself an internationalist. Any comment to the ongoing fire brigade strike? Yeah, full support to the retained firefighters. It's scandalous. People probably don't know, but a majority of our firefighters are not actually, like, they're known as retained firefighters, right? So they're paid but just less than $9,000 a year to be on call, and then they only get paid whenever, extra on top of that, whenever they're actually called. And when they're on call, they have to be within 5 minutes drive. They have to be able to get to the fire station within 5 minutes. It's massively disruptive to their life and so on. So I think they're absolutely right to be on strike. I didn't see the tip man in court over the log cabin in his land. Am I not a nationalist, Paul? No, I'm not a nationalist. I stand for a socialist United Ireland, but I consider myself an internationalist. I think that ordinary people in this country have a lot more in common with ordinary people in Britain or Germany or Greece or France or America or Kazakhstan or Sri Lanka or wherever in the world. Ordinary people actually have common interests, and it's rich people, it's the 1% that want ordinary people to be divided. Am I friends with any Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael TD outside of work? I am not. I am rich. I'm not rich. Which TD is the best crack drinking? I really don't know. I'm afraid I'm not the man to ask about that. Come here. I might leave it there, right? Because I have loads of other stuff to be doing. But yeah, I'll be back next week. All right. And we'll get more questions. Right. Thanks a lot. That was a very lively engagement today. What party got me in? That's a good question. I finished on that one. I'm in People Before Profit, and I encourage you to join People Before Profit. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.